item, we have a presentation regarding the Mauch Lake fish population assessment. We have Mr. Darryl Pierce, Area Fisheries Manager for the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission.
Good morning, folks. So that's the Area 5 regional manager. So I'm responsible for the upper Pennsylvania from the Lehigh River up, all lakes, stream, and the Delaware River as well. I was just asked to give a brief update on the status, how Mauch Chunk's looking, and in short, it's fantastic. I'm really pleased. We went out this past spring, did a survey of the fish and added it to the time series that we have, and the fish population was really impressive. I'm really pleased, particularly with the yellow perch, and the bass are doing well. We have this quick PowerPoint to go through. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So we have two methodologies that we look to do a general analysis on a lake. The first is trap net gear, and this targets panfishes like bluegills, pumpkin seeds, and yellow perch and whatnot. And then it also targets walleye. It's just a big minnow trap is what it really is, and it just directs fish as they move in the spring into a holding pot. We go out, measure, and toss them back into the river. But it gives us an idea of abundance and sizes. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this is an overall reflection of the relative abundance of fishes in the lake. I have the panfishes there in different colors. So for instance, the big purple bar is yellow perch. Back in 1981, we did really well catching fish in that year. I still was in high school, but that year was a good year for yellow perch. The red bar there in 2016, that's a bluegill. That was a great catch. But the one thing I really like about this graph, it gives you an understanding of abundance among the different species. So obviously bluegill is doing a little bit better than say a pumpkin seed, but the stability is a great thing to understand off this graph. And we'll dissect this a little bit more as we move into the PowerPoint. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is black crappie. So in the upper left corner, you see the blue bars, and through the years, there's some variation there. And that's just Mother Nature saying, hey, recruitment or the growth of the juveniles into the adult sizes is going to dictate a little bit on the abundance, right? This is a great year, we're going to have a lot of crappie, or this is a bad year, we're going to lose a lot of juveniles. But what I like about that upper blue bar graph is it's very consistent. Yeah, it'll go up and down, but for the most part through the years, we're doing well. And even more importantly, in the lower right, the squiggly lines, we're seeing the 9-inch black crappie are very consistent among the years. And that's something as a fisheries manager I like to see. So I can tell somebody to come to Mauch Chunk and be comfortable that an average experienced angler is going to have a pretty decent black crappie experience. And you're going to catch something around 9 inches. Now, of course, there's the dinner plates up there, the 13 to 15 size that are available, but you're going to have to know what you're doing to get to that kind of size to be able to catch. And then the regulations, we're under Commonwealth inland waters. It's a combined species, 50 for a daily peg limit, no minimum size. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is bluegill. These are the red bars. So 2016, we did well, and it's a little bit more variable in this. And who knows what happened in 1981 that it was such a low abundance there. But in recent years, between 2019 and 2022, we're still seeing that consistency among years. And again, if we look at the squiggly lines in the lower left, 2022 is in that light blue. And it's very consistent among the years, which makes me pleased. We're seeing about an 8-inch, 9-inch bluegill, 7-inch bluegill being very consistent among the years. And again, we could tell anglers that you're going to have a nice bluegill experience when you fish Mauch Chunk Lake. The other thing that's really fun is in 1981 or in the other years, we see that young are available in the lake and they are growing to size to provide that consistency at the larger size fish that people generally look for or target. Let's go to the next slide. So this is trap net catches for pumpkin seed. They're not as prevalent or as abundant in the lake as say bluegill or black crappie, but they are there. And again, it's the same story. They're very consistent. And on sizes down the lower left, again, we're seeing a nice size distribution right around the 9 8-9 inches, which is a great size for a pumpkin seed or a bluegill. A little bit smaller for black crappie. I like seeing black crappie a little bit bigger than that, but again, consistency. The lake is producing consistent size and abundance of fish, which is what I really like seeing in the lake. Let's move on. So walleye. Walleye is a highly desirable fish for anglers in Pennsylvania. For years, we've stocked Mauch Lake. In 2012, we terminated stocking for walleye. In the upper left is their abundance in the yellow or gold bars. Even our best year ever in 1981, the red bars that are horizontal there, those are our target goals for saying stocking is effective to produce a fishery. Even in our best year, we didn't achieve that. And then in recent years, in 2016, since the 2012 cessation, walleye are still in the lake. And obviously they're not going to make that goal because we stopped stocking. But they're persisting for now. And I would expect over the years as we move forward, we're just going to age that population out of the lake. We're not going to come back and stock walleye. They just don't work. Even in when we're stocking millions of fry in the 80s, we still didn't achieve that goal. And it's really about water quality at this rate. So Mauch Lake is a very typical Pocono lake. It has a high tannic water acidity. And you can see that by the coloration. It's a light brown color. It's an oligotrophic lake. It doesn't have much production. So I'm meaning zooplankton or phytoplankton to support forage for walleye to eat. They're a very demanding fish. They come from the Ohio Basin where all of that's available to them. And then what we did back in the 80s or the 70s is we're trying to introduce Ohio Basin fish into the Delaware Basin fish, and it's just not working. So that's just fact. And so the walleye that are in the lake right now, in the lower left on the squiggly lines, we see that vertical red bar. That's at the legal limit for walleye at 15 inches. If you're going to catch a walleye, I certainly encourage you to harvest it and enjoy the meal because they're all legal size. And eventually they'll just disappear from the lake. Next slide, please. So this is yellow perch, and this is interesting. Remember in the blue bars up there in the upper right, 1981, we had a really bunker year for yellow perch. And what's exciting about that is it's in the squiggly lines, yellow perch in 1981 is in the blue, and we see a lot of 3-inch and 5-inch or 6-inch fish. And that's highly encouraging to a fisheries manager because that's juveniles moving into the adult size. So when we caught those yellow perch in 81, it was the little tiny things. And so that we love that. I mean, people like seeing big fish and talking about catching all the big fish they get, but I'm all excited about the little things. And that's prevalent through all these graphs. We see a lot of recruitment to provide that stability of those populations through the years. And that's the best thing I could ever see in a lake. Now, since we had that big catch in 1981, that tends to downplay on the graph in 2019 and 2022. But flat out, I'm really excited. I think the best key feature that Mauch provides to anglers for the county is the yellow perch. It's phenomenal. Look at the size range for 2022 in that light blue bar, 11, 12, 13-inch yellow perch. Those are trophies. That is a meal and a half right there. And that's something to be very proud of. I mean, that lake is producing quality yellow perch. And that I can't say enough about that. That's just, I think if you're going to sell the lake, that species right there will sell the lake for you. Let's move on. So the other gear type that we use to assess a lake population is night boat electrofishing. We do it at night because we have better catchability. So bass or walleye, which is what we're targeting when we go out with this gear type versus panfish, they come into the shallows to feed. So we have an easier time to catch them. So I kind of stacked the deck a little in that regard. But this uses electrofishing and it induces immobilization into them. They come up to the surface. We net them, measure them, toss them back. Let's move on. So again, this is just an overview slide of relative abundance. I put this in here just so we can see, how one fish stacks up to the other. And again, we'll dissect this graph as we move forward. But the blue bars is yellow perch, and again, it's the same story. It's consistency. Although in 2001 we had a great year, And then smallmouth bass in red bars there, certainly 1992, for whatever reason, we came up with a lot of smallmouth bass. But in the later years, in 2022, 2019, 2016, again, some variability, but I love the consistency there. Let's move to the next slide and look at it in a little more detail. So the blue bars, that's largemouth bass, and Mauch right now is under the big bass program. And so what that regulation is trying to offer anglers the experience to come out and catch trophy sized bass. That's the intent of it. We're not quite meeting that. While we have a consistent population coming through here, in all those years that we've surveyed, only around 1.2 to just over 5% of our catch in our night boat electrofishing was only big bass, 15 inches or better, which is the vertical bar in the squiggly line graph. I'm not happy with that. It's a little concerning, but what I am happy with and what I truly love about the largemouth bass in this lake is look at the sizes. And so in 2022, we're right at the 12-inch, 13-inch bass. And large bass, to a lot of anglers, it's an individual preference. Some folk are very satisfied with a 12-inch bass. Other folk, since it's under the big bass regs, are looking for that large bass. But the consistency of a 12 or 13-inch bass, largemouth bass coming out of Mauch, that's, again, something to be really proud of. I like how that's happening because the lake has incredible use on it. I mean, there's a lot of people fishing that lake. And to be able to, through the years, keep all these fish populations coming through is fantastic. But I am concerned that we're not getting as many as I was hoping to above the 15-inch. So let's go to the next slide. And I'll address this a little bit more once we get to the stocking section. Next slide, please. Smallmouth bass, there we go. I threw this in here. Smallmouth bass is a small component of the big bass reg. So big bass reg looks at all bass together, spotted bass, smallmouth, and largemouth. We don't have spotted bass in Delaware drainage. They are not indigenous to the Delaware. But smallmouth, they're more of a riverine bass, so they don't do well in lakes as it is. But I wanted to just show this, they're much less abundant in proportion to the largemouth bass, but they're not contributing to the big bass experience at all. And we catch so few of them in the recent years, I just don't even have squiggly lines to show you what the size classes are. But roughly they're under 12 inches or less. Let's go to the next slide, please. So coming back to the walleye, since we stopped stocking, obviously in the early years, we caught some walleye with this gear type, but they're just aging out of the population. In the recent years, since 2012, when we terminated stocking, we're just not catching them anymore. So I don't even have sizes to show you from this gear type, but based on the trap that catches, again, if an angler is here, he catches a walleye and he wants it, it's legal at this point. I'd be more than happy to hear walleye stories that they harvested that fish. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, stocking. So I'm going to change gears a little bit, and this is going to be my thoughts on how we can address some of the big bass regs relative to the largemouth bass population. So let's move on. So what can we do to get more of the population? So when I go out with the night boat electrofishing, I'm looking for the largemouth in my catches to be more than 5%. And I would be happy with that. 5 to 10% would be ecstatic if I can get there. In Mauch, the habitat for bass is incredible. I mean, it's probably one of the best lakes I've seen for bass habitat in the Northeast. I mean, the South Bank is beautiful with all the rock and boulder that's in there. There's plenty of places to hold and rear and grow a large bass. On the other shore, it's nice, shallow nesting areas and spawning areas. So I don't think habitat's a limiting influence on the bass population. The other thing I don't know is angler use. But in all those squiggly lines showing the link frequencies, there's absolutely no indication on any fish, whether it's bluegill, pumpkin seed, or bass, it would be by poaching, but there's no indication of cropping. So it doesn't seem to be that anglers are a limiting influence on the population. Right, so we're seeing consistent abundance and we're seeing consistent size distributions. Even though I don't know what the angler use and harvest is, I just don't think it's that much of an influence on the populations. So the third bullet, I think what we need to step or think about in moving forward is competition, and it's all about food. So we have a lake, we have a lot of bass in it, and they're doing well. But the question is, what are they eating and what's available? So Mauch is a low productivity water, which means we have low zooplankton or phytoplankton, low microscopic animals. Golden shiners feed on those zooplankton and phytoplankton, and then in turn, the bass would feed on the golden shiners. Now, at this point, I believe the bass are certainly feeding on the bluegill, pumpkin seeds, and anything else that they can fit in their mouth, whether it's frogs, insects, and whatnot. But I'm wondering if all those 12 inchers and smaller size bass are just out competing each other, and then what happens is they stunt themselves in growth, and then they find themselves, there's just not enough food for me to get any bigger. And so what I'd like to try and do, and I talked to the park commission this morning, what I'd like to try and do is start stocking golden shiners. These are forage fish that are common in Northeast Pennsylvania. They know they're indigenous to this basin. They know how to feed in low liquid trophic waters with low productivity. And that would offer an increased food resource that hopefully the largemouth bass can start targeting and then grow up more to size, not only larger, but hopefully faster. So the other thing I don't know is how long does it take to get a bass to 12 inches in Mauch Lake? It may be up to 10 years. All right, but if I get more resource in there for them to eat, maybe I can shave some of that off and then they can blossom up and grow to size a lot faster. So I'm looking to stock the lake, roughly a little less than 100 per acre with golden shiners, and to try and bolster that forage base. I'm going to do that from 2023 to 2025. I'll come back to Mauch Lake in 25 in the spring and summer and fall, and then do a reassessment and see where we're at. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is just coming back to walleye. I threw this in there so people have the history, and I believe you all have the PowerPoint, so this can be distributed however you want. But this is the history of walleye stocking. So back in the early years, we're throwing in quite a few fry or fingerlings. And as the program grew through the years, our hatcheries just couldn't produce enough to support stocking on the broad scale that we were doing. In the recent years, we had to cut back. And we got to the point where walleye just weren't working in any of those years, regardless of how many we stocked. So the program is terminated. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a fun fact. I threw this in here. This is trout stocking. Mauch Creek, right below the lake, is a stock trout water. It's a high use water. It's very popular. Thank you very much. I love this water. Last time I was on it, I think I got 150 anglers within the first hour of opening day of trout. And these are the stockings that we put in. This is what will go in this spring. The Lehigh River is also a stocking for Carbon County. And again, thank you for that as well. I counted that this spring. I think off the top of my head, I forgot to put it in this PowerPoint, but up at Glen and Oco, I got around 40 anglers around 10 o'clock in the morning, and roughly, I think it was 30 down here off the parking lot in town, which is incredible. It's been growing through the years. People are starting to like a large river as a stock trout water to get a different experience. And the best thing that this provides for us is, hey, Mauch is really busy. If I don't want to stand shoulder to shoulder with folk, I just drive 3 miles down to downtown. I can fish to Lehigh and still have a fun time with it. Let's go to the next slide, please. And that's all I have for you, folk. If there are any questions, I'm trying to do my best.
What the heck is electrofishing?
Well, this
Battery in there?
yeah, I'm getting a little nervous because it really gets me excited, and I'm wondering if that's just a masochistic side of me, but it's a boat and there's probes that stick off the front of the boat, and we have copper tubes that hang off those poles, And it is a big battery essentially. And what happens is the copper poles are the positive, and then the boat hull itself is the negative. And so we use a generator and we put out probably a little more than what you get out of the wall outlet here. And yeah, you don't want to touch the water. And what happens is when you put electricity through the water, I like to use the example back when I was in high school, we put electricity to a frog leg and you saw it jerk, right? But that's what electricity does. It induces tetany, which makes your muscles contract and expand involuntarily. You can't help it. That's what happens. And it causes the fish to enact, it's not swimming, but it looks like a swimming motion. And they'll come up to the positive or the copper droppers. We simply scoop them up, put them in the tub, measure them, throw them back. It's a stun effect. It's like a taser. They'll shake it off within seconds to a minute and then back in the water and away you go.
Another quick question. Did this replace dynamite fishing?
Well, I worked for the state of Florida for many years prior to coming to here. And I remember a fellow from Parks, he said they surveyed a lake and his biggest challenge was getting the fish out of the trees. Because it was too much primacord. Yes, this does substitute for dynamite a lot better.
Darryl, our lake, Mauch Lake Park and Mauch Creek are under potential threat due to consideration by the borough, Jim Thorpe, of loosening zoning in regards to really what ends up being permitting on-lot septic systems within 1,000 feet of Mauch Lake Park and Mauch Creek. Can you talk a little bit about, what threat potentially on-lot septic systems pose to our waterways in Pennsylvania, specifically to Mauch Lake Park, if you could?
Sure, I'll talk from a biological aspect. I'll stay away from regulation. That's not me, that's DEP. From a biological perspective, raw sewage is just bad. All right, and back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, the thing was you build a cabin, you put a straight pipe into the lake, and you really didn't see much of an effect, probably because that was the only cabin on that water. Now, as we get more and more urbanization, more agriculture, more everything, stressing our waterways and our lakes, we're going to get more runoff, more input of nutrients, right? I mean, raw sewage is nothing more than a very rich nutrient. And you're seeding the lake. We're putting in more nitrogen, more phosphorus, more carbon. And these are the basic elements that phytoplankton, zooplankton, bacteria need to grow. And when you spike a lake with that, it's just going to bloom. In some regards, we're going to talk about a minor benefit that's far outweighed by the negativities. The small benefit is zooplankton, phytoplankton are going to bloom. Well, then the golden shiners in your forage are going to bloom, and then eventually your predators are going to bloom, right? So we can think of it that way. But that's going to be far outweighed by the negativity. So what's going to happen is we're going to have a bloom of phytoplankton, zooplankton, these bacteria, they're going to die much faster than you're going to get the benefit from the forage. When they die off, now the biological demand for oxygen to degrade all that material is going to strip oxygen out of the lake, and there's large potential that the lake can go hypoxic or anoxic, meaning there's nothing for the fish to breathe. And more importantly, then we're going to start introducing harmful algal blooms. And we're certainly introducing bacteria that's going to cause closures from a human health perspective. So one of the best benefits that Mauch has right now is it's fully within the county park system. And urbanization and development around the park lake is helping protect the water from runoff, from direct sewage input and things like that. The more land that you can get around and in that drainage basin, the better you will be at protecting the lake from those kinds of conditions. Certainly as urbanization and agriculture continue to increase and develop throughout the East Coast, you're going to see algal blooms in the lake. There's nothing, You know, it's gonna happen, it's a thing. But I would urge you to do the best we can to keep the drainage basin as well protected as we can, so that mud chunk doesn't build up to the point where we're gonna see harmful algal blooms.
Thanks, Darryl.
Very important.
Yep.
Thank you.
I just have one question for you.
Yes, sir.
With the walleye not being there, will that help the other fish more populate because aren't they more dominant than the others, or is that not correct?
No, that's a good observation. And yes, you are correct. With less top level predators, the forage is going to be less stressed. Now, the walleye haven't been there since 2012. And bass are still not being what I expect for a big bass regulation. So I'm targeting 5 to 10% of my catches being big bass size, 15 inches or greater, because I want to be able to tell an average experienced angler, hey, you can go there and have a good opportunity to catch a trophy size bass. I mean, that's what big bass is supposed to do. Now, you know, getting there and be satisfied with a 12-inch bass, yeah, I'd be very satisfied with a 12-inch bass, and a lot of folk would be. But we're not seeing the response from the lack of walleye being in the lake upon the largemouth bass. Certainly, chain pickerel are benefiting, and they're doing well in the lake, which they're fun to catch as well. I don't personally care to eat them, but yes, I would expect less competition from that aspect. Yeah, yeah. But I think if we stock forage and do that for 3 years, let's wait it out, see what happens, and see where we can go after that.
Thanks so much, Darryl. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Do we want to let the press, if they have any questions before Darryl heads out?
Any questions or? Good, good. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, feel free to contact me whenever. I'm on the internet or